Look at this photo. You'd never guess this smiling child was just hours away from being rushed to the ER, barely conscious, with a fractured clavicle, severe brain swelling, and burns that looked eerily like cigarette marks. Her name was Ellie Plummer, just 18 months old, barely talking, barely walking. And the person who brought her to the hospital was her own mother, Cheyenne Hill.
Snoring, so she was, as far as I knew, fine. You know, I think about it like she's a baby, and she bruises easily, which she might have lupus, so we're not sure if it's because of that she's bruising easily. Went back in there to wake her up before I went to work, to take her down to the babysitter, and she wouldn't wake up. I thought maybe she was just too tired.
That was Cheyenne's response, calm, detached, describing her daughter's condition shortly before the child was declared critical. And this wasn't the first red flag. Just 6 days before her death, there was already a warning.
I had a report made, let me pull up the actual date, a few days ago for mom, who is Cheyenne Hill. Baby is, oh, you got all that, Eliana. So it was reported on the 17th that they were staying with Cameron Fleming and his 2 children, and the home belongs to Cameron, and that strong chemical drug-like smells were coming from the apartment, as well as marijuana.
Cameron who?
Fleming.
And where does he live?
It says 7 Maple Ridge, but we checked it out. That's not an apartment. So we got 5 from what we tried. But mom will be able to give us that. And then the child also has a babysitter, Michelle Morrow. And this report was for drug use. And then it also mentioned the child had lightened bruises on her face, and that it was said that she fell out of bed.
So what really happened inside that home? Why did a mother who knew her child was unresponsive go to work instead of calling 911? Welcome to Channel Name, where every cold case whispers a story, and we're here to listen. Now, let's dive into today's case. Cheyenne Hill was born on March 20th, 1990, a name that, until recently, meant nothing to the world. But that changed with a single headline. Now, the state of Indiana remembers her for something it wishes it could forget. On the surface, she seemed like just another young woman trying to get by. But beneath that surface was a broken history stitched together with unstable jobs, substance use, and a trail of red flags no one acted on. She was a single mother to 18-month-old Ellie Plummer, a baby with soft curls, big brown eyes, and no real voice of her own. Ellie couldn't speak yet, and the truth is, no one ever truly listened to her. They lived in a small, rented apartment with Cheyenne's boyfriend, Cameron Fleming, a man who brought 2 children of his own into the home, together. The house held 5 lives but very little peace. Neighbors reported frequent arguments, a revolving door of tension, and the lingering smell of weed drifting through the halls. Cheyenne had no steady career. Her income was spotty, her living situation fragile, according to records. She had a history of drug use and a volatile past, but one thing she always insisted on, she loved her daughter.
I'm losing my mind. He was my one and only. I had a C-section in my tube side. Ellie was it.
That confession echoed through the interrogation room like a broken prayer. Maybe Cheyenne believed Ellie was her last chance, a miracle she wasn't ready for. A second shot at life. But no one could have imagined that same little girl would have her light extinguished not by a stranger, not by fate, but by the very hands that claimed to love her most. For those who had seen Cheyenne cradling Ellie in line at the grocery store or sitting quietly at a pediatric appointment, they never could have guessed. That child, the one with the barely there voice, wouldn't live long enough to call her mother mom. Cheyenne Hill wasn't just a single mother. She was a woman clinging to love like it was the last rope keeping her afloat. To those who knew her, she was someone who would bend herself backwards just to keep a man from walking away. According to a former co-worker, Cheyenne once broke down in tears and confessed, "I thought my boyfriend would marry me, If only I didn't have a baby. At first glance, it might have sounded like the fragile cry of someone exhausted, but in hindsight, it felt like a quiet prelude to something far more disturbing. Ellie voiceless, defenseless. Not yet old enough to form full sentences, lived in a home where love came with conditions, where affection was doled out depending on convenience. Cheyenne described her parenting style as free roaming. She let Ellie crawl around the apartment, picking at scraps off the floor like a stray animal. But outsiders had started to notice signs. Neighbors recalled the baby showing up with strange bruises on her face. She was seen eating pieces of hamburger off the kitchen floor. And time after time, a thick cloud of weed hung in the air, leaking from under the front door. Cheyenne had an explanation for everything. The bruises, she bruises easily. The late night screaming, it's normal for toddlers. The injuries, not me, must have been the babysitters.
Michelle hurt Ellie?
Because Kevin and Michelle, whenever she'd come back, she would have a bruise bigger from there. That's why it had to have been Kevin and Michelle, because the time frame that they said that it had to.
Kevin and Michelle, the babysitters, became the perfect scapegoats in Cheyenne's ever-changing story. But those purple marks on Ellie's cheeks, those nights she cried alone in the dark, those weren't accidents. Reports had been filed with Child Protective Services. Warnings had been raised. Knocks were made, but no one opened the door in time. And while adults traded blame and excuses, the one person who could have told the truth was still too young to speak. On the morning of November 23, 2022, Cheyenne Hill carried her 18-month-old daughter, Ellie Plummer, into Riley Children's Hospital in Indianapolis, Indiana. But this wasn't a routine visit. By then, Ellie was barely alive, unconscious, covered in bruises, with a swollen head, a fractured collarbone, and circular burns on her skin, the kind you'd expect from a lit cigarette. The toddler's body showed signs of severe trauma, a reality far too brutal for a child who had barely begun to walk, let alone speak. Doctors immediately placed Ellie in intensive care and alerted authorities within minutes. The level of injury was far beyond any common household accident. She was just snoring. According to Cheyenne, the last time she saw Ellie acting normal was around 5:20 a.m. The child had cried a little, then went back to sleep. By 8:00 a.m., Cheyenne said Ellie was still in bed, snoring softly and in her words.
She was still sleeping, she was snoring, so she was, as far as I knew, fine. I went into Cameron's room and hung out with him for a little bit to talk.
She claimed nothing looked off. Cheyenne then went into her boyfriend Cameron Fluming's room to chat. It wasn't until later, around the time she was about to leave for work, that she returned to check on Ellie. The baby didn't wake up.
Cameron tells you that she looks pale. You tried to wake her up, she just grunted.
Made little noises, like she didn't want to be bothered.
Okay, and then what did you say or do?
Like, continued to try to wake her up.
And then
She
what?
just
She wouldn't wake up.
didn't wake up.
Okay, and then what did you do?
I checked her eyes. They didn't dilate, but they seemed normal. Like they were normal.
Instead of calling 911, Cheyenne asked Cameron to watch Ellie while she left for work. An hour later, Cameron texted Ellie didn't look right. She still wasn't moving. Cheyenne came back, and the two drove Ellie to the hospital in their personal car. The injuries were devastating. Doctors concluded Ellie had no chance of survival. Among her injuries, acute brain bleeding, a fractured left clavicle, cerebral swelling, bruises across her face around the eyes, forehead, and cheeks, burn marks small, round, consistent with a cigarette pressed into the skin. One medical staff member described the burns on Ellie's face as consistent with an extinguished cigarette. And what did Cheyenne say caused the swelling? She said Ellie had fallen out of bed a week and a half ago at Cameron's house. She claimed she had iced the bump to reduce the swelling the night before.
Nothing had been different. That she originally had a knot on her head because she fell. She rolled off the bed about a week and a half ago.
Was here in between her eyes? Okay.
And I had iced it last night because it looked like it was a little bit bigger, so I iced it to try to get the swelling down.
Okay.
She denied seeing anything physically wrong with Ellie before that morning.
You, from the time you left her and went to work until you had returned and brought her here, had you noticed anything physically different?
No.
Nothing visibly?
No,
And when asked why she didn't call 911 immediately, She had no answer. She didn't panic. She didn't explain. She simply said she picked Ellie up and drove to the hospital. That cold detachment raised instant red flags with the police. Even after being told that Ellie wouldn't survive, that the little girl was beyond saving, Cheyenne showed no panic, no grief, no breakdown. Detectives noticed it, so they brought her in for questioning. Because what had just walked into the ER wasn't a child with an accident. It was the aftermath of something far worse. Riley Hospital didn't just receive a dying child that morning. They received a mystery and a mother who didn't act like one. Doctors took one look at 18-month-old Ellie Plummer and knew this wasn't an accident. The baby had severe bruising, a fractured clavicle, a swollen skull, and a brain hemorrhage. And yet, her mother, Cheyenne Hill, remained disturbingly calm. Police didn't have to look far. Cheyenne was still at the hospital when they arrived. The initial interview was soft, cooperative. No cuffs, just questions. But within minutes, something felt off. Cheyenne was too prepared. She recalled exact times. Ellie went to sleep at 3:40 a.m. and was still snoring when Cheyenne checked her around 8:00. She said she left Ellie with her boyfriend, Cameron, and headed to work. But that same morning, an anonymous call had been made to Child Services. The caller described Ellie as unresponsive, limp, like half dead, and said she had fingerprint-shaped marks on both sides of her face, as if someone had grabbed and squeezed her tiny cheeks. When asked about Ellie's bruises, Cheyenne brushed it off. "She bruises easily," she said. "The swollen forehead. She fell off the bed last week. I iced it." Her answers were too composed, her wording oddly clinical. She casually mentioned terms like subdural hematoma, pupil dilation, and posturing. For a part-time worker with a history of drug use, it was all suspiciously fluent. Detectives began to suspect Cheyenne wasn't just neglectful, she was scripting the interview. The tone shifted. Cheyenne started pointing fingers at Cameron, at the babysitters, even suggesting brain parasites. Anyone but herself. Whenever asked why she didn't call 911, she deflected. Tears, self-pity, but never accountability. "I didn't know. How would I know?" And yet, according to witness reports, she had seen the signs. People had begged her to get Ellie help, and she refused. One chilling message surfaced. Under no circumstances are you to call an ambulance or take her into the hospital yourself. I will make the decisions. That is my child. That morning, she didn't call emergency services. She texted her boyfriend instead. She even asked a coworker if her daughter might just be in a really deep sleep. Another text of hers, even more disturbing, simply read, "I wanted to throw her." At first glance, a frustrated parent venting, but now a thread in a darker pattern. Throughout the hours-long interrogation, Cheyenne cycled through emotion after emotion, fear, grief, guilt. But the spotlight always stayed on her. She spoke of Ellie's birthday, her graduation, her wedding, but not once did she admit she knew her daughter was in danger and left anyway. When asked why she went to work that morning, her answer was sharp. "Because I have to provide for my child." The detective countered, "Who's gonna do that now?" Cheyenne responded, "A woman who's about to be homeless." Her emotional swings became so erratic. One detective later described it plainly. "She's acting." In the end, the harsh truth emerged. If she truly understood how serious Ellie's condition was, her inaction was a crime. If she didn't understand, then she knowingly left a fragile baby in a house full of danger. Either way, Ellie never had a chance. Cheyenne Hill never gave a full confession, but in the end, she didn't need to. Her story cracked open under the weight of contradiction, her unnerving calm, her refusal to act, and most of all, the horrific trauma written across her daughter's tiny body. Doctors didn't believe for a second this was accidental. During interrogation, she tried to justify the unjustifiable.
I asked them at work. You can ask them. Asked Evelyn. I asked her, I said, "Is it normal for a baby to sleep like that?" Because I thought she hit that stage of REM sleep. That's what I thought. But no, I was wrong for going to work to provide for my family, right? I've done nothing but try to take care of her. I will live with her the rest of my life, whether or not I failed her, as you've said. But I didn't do it intentionally. I didn't do it because I wanted my daughter to die.
There was no screaming, no outright denial, no moment of reckoning. Cheyenne wept, she protested, she spiraled, but never once did she say I was wrong. Instead, she clung to the idea that leaving a barely responsive toddler home alone for an hour was somehow forgivable, even as her daughter lay dying from brain swelling and fresh bruises. Then came the moment that made detectives pause, not because they believed her, but because the act was so rehearsed.
Clear you, okay? And one of the easiest ways to do that is I would like to know if you will take a polygraph.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm sorry, I 100% know that that's what happened.
But that certainty didn't ring true. It rang hollow like every other performance from the hospital to the station. This wasn't the confidence of an innocent woman. This was theater. When the autopsy report was released, fractured clavicle, subdural hematoma, widespread cerebral edema, and bruises in various stages of healing, it said what Cheyenne never did. The court didn't need her confession. The forensic pathologist spoke louder than she ever could. Cheyenne Hill was charged with neglect of a dependent, resulting in death, a charge that many argued didn't match the horror Ellie endured. But at that time, it was all the legal system could prove. In court, Cheyenne continued her act. Tears, regret, stories of hardship. But the audience wasn't buying it anymore. The words were too polished, the sorrow too rehearsed. The mask was slipping. In February 2024, Cheyenne Hill was convicted by a jury on the charge of neglect of a dependent, resulting in death. As Deputy Prosecutor Joshua Scherschel said in his final argument, she did it knowingly. We don't know beyond a reasonable doubt who did the physical act that killed Ellie Plummer. Unfortunately, we do know her mother had a responsibility to care for that child, but she put her in danger to the point of death. That single sentence captured the soul of this case. No murder weapon, no confession, but an undeniable chain of choices that led straight to Ellie's grave. On June 18th of 2024, Judge John Plummer III sentenced Cheyenne Hill to 30 years in prison. This little girl needed someone to advocate for her, speak up for her, and protect her. It was Cheyenne's responsibility to do that, and she did not. This is very tragic. This was an emotional case and was hard for everyone. To some extent, there is justice for Eliana today. How could a mother see her child unresponsive and not call 911? How could she text a few words, leave for work, and let others decide when to seek help? That question exploded across social media as news of Ellie Plummer's death spread. But the outrage wasn't just for Cheyenne Hill. It was for a system that was supposed to protect her child and failed, spectacularly. Just 6 days before Ellie was admitted to the hospital, an anonymous report had reached Child Protective Services. It warned of a home filled with chemicals and the smell of marijuana. It noted signs of abuse. 6 days, that's how long the system had to stop this, and it didn't. Ellie's death wasn't just personal tragedy. It was institutional failure. On parenting forums and Facebook groups, strangers began sharing Ellie's photo, her wide brown eyes, her small curls alongside one haunting question. If it were my child, what would I have done differently? But even in the storm of public grief and anger, Cheyenne never broke character. She was still the victim of circumstance, of misunderstanding, of a single hour at work. She still cried. She still told her story. But never once, not once did she say, I'm responsible. I'll live with this guilt for the rest of my life, but I'm not a killer. And in that final statement, we saw the same Cheyenne, the woman who didn't dial 911, the mother who walked out the door while her toddler lay still, the person who to the very end refused to believe that her silence, her delay, her indifference had killed an 18-month-old child. Cheyenne Hill was sentenced to 30 years in prison, but for Eliana, justice came too late. She was only 20 months old, unable to speak for herself, unable to run, unable to understand why the one person meant to protect her chose silence instead. After the trial, more disturbing details emerged. A former babysitter claimed Hill refused medical help for Eliana, mocking her cries and warning others not to make a scene. Her boyfriend at the time testified that Hill showed no love, only cold contempt. According to court documents, Eliana had gone days without food. Her body bore signs of bruises in different stages of healing. Her skull was swollen, her collarbone snapped. Inside her mouth, torn tissue told a story no child should ever endure. She died in silence. And when the autopsy photo was shown in court, seasoned prosecutors looked away. Today, Eliana is remembered not just as a victim, but as a child failed by every adult who should have loved her. Her grave is marked with a teddy bear, a flower, and a name she never learned to say. No crying, no screaming, no more birthdays, just silence. Thanks for tuning in to 10 Channel. If you're intrigued by mysteries from around the world, check out our new videos, where we dive into the gripping true crime stories. Don't miss out.